What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you are new here, welcome to my channel and welcome back to another True Crime Sunday. Today we have another missing persons case, and this one is one that is unsolved. This is one of the most perplexing cases I think I've ever come across, where I actually don't have a theory for. This is the most confusing case ever in the world. Not in the world, but it's a very confusing case. And if you're a true crime junkie, you know about the case of Brian Shaffer. Now, if Brian was alive today, and if he is alive today, he would be 40, and he'd turn 41 in February. Brian's case has been one that has stayed with me ever since I heard about it. And it's a case that has spanned over 13 years as I'm filming it right now. And it's also a case that I don't believe will ever be solved. I don't think we're ever gonna get answers into the Brian Shaffer case. So Brian disappeared roughly when he was 27 years old. So Brian disappeared on April 1st in 2006. He disappeared from Columbus, Ohio in the United States. And he was studying at Ohio State University. But before he was studying as a medical student, he actually completed a degree. So he graduated from OSU with a degree in microbiology. Brian grew up in a suburb in Columbus called Pickerington. He had a younger brother, and he was the son of Randy and Renee Shaffer. Unfortunately, Renee Shaffer would pass away in 2006. And it would be within the same month that he would disappear. After his mother passed away, his friends said that he was dealing with it quite well, but obviously it was still a traumatic event for him. His mother had just passed away. So while Brian was trying to cope with his mother's passing, he was still trying to juggle a degree, and it just was a really rough time for him. But he was doing it all with the help of his father, who was still living, and his brother, and he also had a long-term girlfriend called Alexis. Alexis was also a medical student, and they actually met in their first year. Alexis saw him and she thought he was cute, and she told her friend that she thought he was cute. So Alexis's friend would actually tell Brian what Alexis had said when they were all at a concert together. Brian took the leap and he asked Alexis out. He asked her if she wanted to get food and if she wanted to study together. Their relationship blossomed, but it was heavily revolved around family and also around their studies. And all of Brian's friends and family said that the couple were on the path to marriage. In fact, a lot of Brian's friends and family said that they had an upcoming holiday to Miami, where everyone presumed that he was going to propose to her. In fact, the trip to Miami was a predictable location for Brian, because he's always been that person who really loved tropical, sunny vibes. And although his degree were based in science, what Brian really wanted in life was to become a rock star. He really wanted to start a band, and he was just that kind of dude. So the week before Brian disappeared, he had just had, it was the week before spring break. So he had been staying up all night. He'd been cramming. He was quite obviously stressed and tired. This is something that his father noted when he took his son out for dinner. They went out to dinner to celebrate the end of the semester and the start of spring break. The father and son enjoyed a steak dinner before Brian would go out with some friends. Now, Randy noted in his mind, not voicing his concerns to his son, but he noted in his mind that his son seemed super stressed and super tired, and he really didn't want him to go out that night. But he didn't say anything, and nevertheless, Brian would end up going out. So on that night, the 31st of March, the father and son would enjoy a steak dinner before Brian went out with his friend, whose name is Clint Florence. It was before 9 p.m. when Brian would get a call from Alexis to check in, and she said that on the phone call he seemed like he was just ready to go out with his friends, and that he would talk to her later. And then an hour later at around 10 p.m. that's when he met his friend Clint Florence. They started their pub crawl at a bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloona. They had a few drinks there, and then they had a couple of drinks at a couple of different establishments, but every single place that they went, they had one shot. And at the end of the night, they ended up back at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, but they met a friend of Clint's. Clint's friend's name is Meredith, and she gave the boys a ride back to the Ugly Tuna Saloona before enjoying one last drink with them. And keep in mind that the Ugly Tuna Saloona actually closes at 2 a.m. Now, Meredith and Clint realized that Brian was nowhere to be seen after they had their drink at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, and so they decided, because the bar was closing pretty soon, they would just wait outside and see if he came out, and then they would all go home. But when 2 a.m. rolled around and everybody had left the bar except for Brian, they just assumed that Brian left without telling them and went home. Both Meredith and Clint went home, and they didn't follow up or check in with Brian the whole weekend. But Brian's dad and Brian's girlfriend Alexis both tried calling him on the weekend to no avail. They didn't get any answer or any call back. In fact, it was that Monday morning when Brian was supposed to board the flight to Miami with his girlfriend Alexis, but he never showed up. This set off red flags with Alexis and also with his father, and they decided to report Brian as a missing person. The Columbus police force started their investigation at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, which is the last place that anybody saw Brian. Because Columbus has an extremely high crime rate, the Ugly Tuna Saloona has like 1 trillion different surveillance cameras. And when police reviewed the footage, they did see Brian coming up the escalator and talking to 2 women who were standing at the top of the escalator just in front of the entrance to the bar. This was around 1:55 a.m. with only 5 minutes before the bar was set to close. Brian finished up talking to the 2 women, and he headed in the direction of the entrance to the bar, as if he's going to re-enter the bar 5 minutes before close. This would be the last time any camera would pick up Brian, and the last time that anybody would see Brian alive again. And for a really long time, people thought that Brian could have changed his clothes, put on a hat, and have been able to walk out of the entrance without being detected. However, the police did a count, making sure that they could see that every single person who went in to the Ugly Tuna Saloona also came out, and they were left with a count of -1, meaning that one person never exits the Ugly Tuna Saloona, and the only person missing is Brian. This means that there is no possible chance that Brian exited the bar from the main entrance. There was only one other exit or entrance into the bar, and this was through a back entry, which was behind the kitchen and exited into a construction site because there was construction at the time of the disappearance. Now, patrons do not have access to this exit, and the only people who were said to have access to it were the musicians who were playing at the Ugly Tuna Saloona that night. They were supposed to have been using this exit to take out their equipment, take out their instruments, and make it easier for them to get out of the bar without having to go through the main entrance where all the patrons were. Now, the police on this case said that it's extremely unlikely that Brian exited through this exit because the construction site would have been extremely difficult for anyone to navigate, especially not someone who would have been as intoxicated as Brian would have been at the time. On top of this, they did actually check every single surrounding establishment's video cameras and surveillance cameras to see if they could pick up any trace of Brian. And if he did come out of that back entrance, there would have been footage of him. If Brian had have come out of the back entrance, which opened up into a construction site, he would have been picked up by surveillance cameras of the establishments surrounding the construction site. But there is no trace of Brian on any of those surveillance cameras. This is concerning, especially because the city of Ohio has more surveillance cameras than Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Toledo combined. This is because they have such a high crime rate. So the fact that he's not picked up on any surveillance cameras in the vicinity of the Ugly Tuna Saloona is concerning. The police didn't just rely on surveillance footage or their count of the people who came in and out of the Ugly Tuna Saloona. They also brought in sniffer dogs to try and pick up a scent, but there was literally no trace of Brian. He was not picked up at the back entrance and they just couldn't find a scent. They found nothing. In fact, the police even got the permission from the city to go in the underground sewers to try and see if he was in there. Nothing. Zilch. Nada. They looked at bins, waste areas. They couldn't find any trace of him. He wasn't in any bin. His scent wasn't picked up past the bar. They put missing persons posters up all around the city and they paid special attention to a particular tattoo he had. It was a tattoo that he got of an album cover by his favorite band, Pearl Jam. In fact, this particular case was covered extensively and even the band Pearl Jam stopped their concerts to try and get more coverage of this case, to try and find where Brian was in the hopes that, you know, it's his favorite band. If his favorite band were asking, where is Brian? Maybe if he chose to disappear, he would come forward, or just any sort of help to help his family figure out what happened to Brian Shaffer. He also has a defect in his eye where there's like a fleck in his iris, and they put this on posters, and that is another identifier for Brian Shaffer. He also only lived 6 blocks from the Ugly Tuna Saloona, and this particular bar is actually a campus bar. His car was found parked outside of his apartment block and it was untouched. It was locked. There was nothing suspicious to explain his disappearance, and on top of that, none of his bank accounts have been touched since that night, and his phone has never been used since that night. In fact, we cannot find the phone. I say we as in involved in this. I'm not. That's just like, we as in the public. I don't know. Every single person in Brian's life was given a polygraph test, a lie detector test. And every single person said yes, except for his friend, Clint Florence. Now, even Clint Florence's friend from that night, Meredith, she took a polygraph test and she passed. But Clint refuses to take one, and he also refuses to talk about the case to anyone. Now, Brian's father, obviously he was distressed. He wanted to find his son, and he wanted to do anything that he possibly could and utilize every single resource. So he actually got in contact with a psychic who told him that Brian would be found in a body of water. This led Randy to search the Olentangy, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but Olentangy River, which flows through Columbus, and it's adjacent to the campus. When concerned citizens and people who were following this case picked up on what Randy was doing, a lot of them bought waders and joined him, spending a lot of their free time in the river looking for a body. But still, there was no trace of Brian and no new information came. But his girlfriend Alexis didn't give up. She called his phone every single night before bed for an entire year. And on one of those days, instead of going straight to voicemail, it rung out several times. And this gave her a new hope. However, the wireless company that was connecting his phone said that it was likely just a fluke, that it was just a mistake and it might not mean anything. But when the phone did ring, it pinged off a tower which was not too far away from Columbus. It was 23 Ks away. From Brisbane to the Gold Coast, I believe, is like 60 Ks. Yeah. When I'm thinking about it, 23 Ks is not that far away. There have been possible sightings in Sweden and none of them panned out to be anything. And obviously, as I'm sure you already have guessed, a lot of suspicion has been put on his friend Clint Florence for not being very helpful in the investigation. He won't do a polygraph test, he won't talk to police anymore, he won't talk to the public, he won't help the living brother. He also never helped Randy he just didn't assist anyone he was just completely unhelpful. But we have to remember that polygraph tests are not anything. In fact, they can sometimes be completely incorrect. And so if I was asked to do a polygraph test, even though I know that I didn't do anything, I would just say no. I would never do a polygraph test. But even Brian's brother Derek says that he believes that Clint knows more than what he has said, and whether that has anything to do with Brian being murdered or whether or not Brian just decided that he wanted to leave, he thinks that Clint knows more. Obviously, the theory that Brian decided to disappear is a huge one, of course. But that doesn't account for the fact that the count is off in the entrance of the bar and no scent was picked up by any of the sniffer dogs and no surveillance footage has picked him up on the construction site. Now, something that happened afterwards is that Randy Shaffer was unfortunately struck fatally. He died in a storm when a branch came loose and killed him. This opens up a whole thing where he had an online obituary where people could sign the book and leave a message for the friends and family of the deceased loved one. And someone decided to impersonate Brian. They left a message and they signed it, "Your son, Brian." The person who impersonated Brian signed off as being in the US Virgin Islands, but an investigation was done and it turns out that the message didn't come from the US Virgin Islands and that it actually came from Franklin County, and it was from a computer that anybody had access to. The next theory is that Brian was murdered, and this again opens up to a whole bunch of other theories of like when, where, how. My biggest question in terms of the murder theory is, where would you murder him and how would you murder him? Would he have been murdered in the bar and then been taken out, but then still it would be extremely hard to murder someone in the short period of time and somehow get them out without leaving a scent for dogs to pick up. But there is another theory that he befriended the musicians from that night and that maybe he went out with them. I think that that theory might have some basis, but there are things for me that make that theory kind of impossible. Or at least we need more information before we can even go down that path, because I worked in a bar which was a live music venue for, since I was 18. I'm 26 this year. Generally, bands do not stick around until close. Generally, bands play their set. They might stay for an hour after their set finishes, but generally, they don't stick around until close. So, if Brian befriended the band, cool. But that means nothing unless we know whether the band stayed until close. So if we know that the band stayed until close, then the questions would be, did he help them take their gear out? Did they offer him a ride? There are just so many questions, so many possibilities, but we don't know if they stayed until close. So if Brian somehow made it out of the bar that night through his own choice and he's never accessed his money from the bank and he's never used his phone again, how is he sustaining himself? Well, it's every adult's right to go missing. Generally, they become transients and you don't need money or a phone when you become a transient. Generally, he's already completed his undergraduate degree. He is balls deep in another degree. His mother just passed away. On top of that, if his friends and family are saying that that Monday, when he was supposed to have gone on this holiday where everyone assumed he was going to propose to Alexis, if everyone else is saying that, I am sure that Brian picked up on everyone's assumption. That's a lot of pressure. I cannot imagine having my mother pass away and then having the pressure of proposing to my girlfriend within the same month. A lot of people choose to reject the traditional life. That is a huge reason as to why people choose to be homeless, as to why people choose to become a transient. This seems like a huge reason as to why someone might do that. The pressure of having to propose to someone that maybe, because there were rumors and they aren't corroborated rumors, they're just rumors. The only person who can confirm this rumor is Brian Shaffer himself, and I don't see that happening because he's not here. But there were rumors that he wanted to actually break up with Alexis. He may have felt that pressure and he may have wanted out. His mother just died. He's just come off a week of cramming for assessments, staying up all night, and that Monday, literally that Monday, he was supposed to go on this holiday to Miami where everyone thought he was going to propose. The time to disappear was then. The time to disappear was when he disappeared. Like, that would have been the time that I would have been like, see ya, I'm out. Even the police at the time thought that he had just run away to cope with what had just happened with his mother, but they did believe that he would come back. He just never did. But again, the count from the Ugly Tuna Saloona, how did he, the police have said they do not believe that he ever exited the Ugly Tuna Saloona. And the police have said that they have 3 theories, but they refuse to comment on what those theories are. So we can only speculate, and I'm assuming that one of the theories is that he was murdered in the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Another theory is that he somehow managed to disappear of his own accord, or, oh, I don't even know what the 3rd theory could be. That's interesting. I never thought of that. 3 theories. I can think of 2. But in terms of the, actually no. I know what the 3rd theory could be. Accident. It could have been an accident that was covered up. Because the next theory that I was going to talk about was murder that was covered up. But it is likely, actually more than likely, that it could have been an accident that they covered up. Let's jump into the next theory because that dives right into accident. So a lot of people say that he was murdered and placed into one of the holes in the construction site. But I have a problem with this. I do have a problem with this theory. Because generally when you fill up a hole, you have to look in the hole. It's kind of like the law. It's a workplace health and safety thing in terms of like work sites. And also, I feel like they've been doing construction on the highway for ever since I've been able to drive, ever since I've been in a car. So it does stand to reason that it's unlikely that anyone would just accidentally fill a hole in with a dead person in there, or even a living person who was passed out in a hole. I don't think that someone could have filled in that hole accidentally, especially if there were many people working on the site. If you consider that maybe someone did murder him on the construction site, it still brings in the question of the sniffer dogs. Surely when you murder someone and then sniffer dogs come in, I'm assuming that there's going to be a scent unless you have planned it extremely well. The other thing that I'm thinking is that, is it possible that there was an accident where Brian maybe fell into a hole and maybe the wrong person was there and they decided to cover it up by filling in the hole on purpose? I still believe that there would be some sort of scent, and that's what I'm saying. Every theory that I come up with in my head, there's always something that makes that theory kind of impossible. The owners of the building and the people who were in charge of the construction didn't want to excavate any of the holes that they had filled in or any of the concrete because it would have been too expensive, and the evidence that the police had was merely circumstantial. There was no evidence that Brian was actually in a hole or filled in with concrete. Another interesting thing about this case, in particular with the phone being about 23 kilometers away from Columbus, is that somebody might have taken his phone. Maybe he lost his phone and that's why he went to go back into the bar to find his phone. Maybe someone picked it up when he lost it and maybe they took it with them, took it home, because 20 k's is not that far away. So it's quite possible that whoever picked up his phone realized that they had the phone of a missing person. Maybe they freaked out. Maybe they stole the phone. Maybe they didn't want anyone to think they stole the phone. And so with all of the calls that this phone was getting every night, maybe they tossed the phone. It is quite possible that because Alexis was calling it so often, because it was getting so much activity, that the phone ran out of battery. And maybe someone picked it up, charged it, and when they realized what they had, they turned it off again. And maybe that's why it rang out all those times on that one night. Since Brian's disappearance, the Ugly Tuna Saloona has closed down and also renovated and reopened, but still no answers have come to Brian's only immediate relative, who is Derek. I do wonder about the message on the obituary. It's unclear if it was just a prankster. It's unclear if it was Brian who maybe moved to, where was it, Franklin? It's unclear if who it was. Could it have been the killer? If there was a killer. Whether or not it was a hoax or not. I actually went to the obituary and I read through all of the messages, and the obituary actually names Brian as still alive. It says that, you know, Randy's living sons, Derek and Brian. So I think that's really nice. That it seems really optimistic, and I thought that was sweet. There's a lot of really beautiful messages there for Randy's friends and family. So what do you think happened? I genuinely cannot think of a theory that isn't somehow proven wrong. Anyways, you guys, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really does help. I do a video like this every single Sunday, and I do a regular video on hauls, story times, beauty, all that kind of stuff on Wednesdays, but every Sunday is a true crime Sunday. So if you want to be part of my true crime family, please give me a subscribe. Hopefully I will see you in next week's case. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.